You are listening to the New Jersey Business Podcast with your friend, host, all-around good guy, Paul Valverde. Now, on to the show.
What's shaking, New Jersey? Thank you very much for joining us for another episode of the New Jersey Business Podcast. Today, as special guests, we have Dennis Petrocelli and Andy Raichle from Matrix New World Engineering. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me today. Would you please take turns in introducing yourselves and telling our audience a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for having us this morning. My name is Dennis Petrocelli, and I, along with my wife, co-founded Matrix New World Engineering back in 1990. And for about the last 30 years, we've been a multidisciplinary engineering and environmental consulting firm, and have grown the firm to about 250 professionals, with the majority of them being located up here in the Northeast. And so the areas that we focus on would be infrastructure, environmental issues, transportation, resiliency, and more recently getting involved in a significant number of offshore wind projects.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction, Dennis. Andy, will you please tell our audience a little about yourself?
Sure. Again, thanks for having us. So I've been with Dennis and Jane at Matrix for about 10 years, and I really focus on some specialties, which include climate change, resiliency, and renewable energy, and have built a team around me that really gets involved in some interesting projects, which I think we'll get to talk about as we go through the episode.
Yes. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. I would like to begin by asking you, Dennis, about the origins of Matrix New World Engineering, about the foundation being that it was you and your wife that put it together. Our audience love to learn about the business, but also love to learn about the people that run the business, that started the business, that are behind the business. And I think it's very peculiar of a couple being in business together. So will you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure, happy to. Well, I always tell every folks that I run into who ask this question, I always tell them two great things happened in 1990. Jane and I got married, and we actually started our business. And I'm not entirely sure what we were thinking, two newlyweds in our 30s thinking that we could start an environmental consulting or an engineering consulting firm. And we're very fortunate. There were two end results. We'd be broke and divorced, or hopefully we'd be successful and married. And thankfully, the latter has occurred. And the reason it's worked is that Jane and I are two very different individuals. Jane is an engineer. So she's a licensed professional engineer, civil engineer, geotechnical engineer, and very skilled at engineering, whereas I'm a geologist. So my experience and my background was more related to environmental issues. And so we sort of combined our expertise, and we were able to sort of very slowly but steadily grow a firm over the past 30 years. And it's funny when we're at the office together, we tend to chit chat about things at home, and then we're at home, we chit chat about things at the office. So we've just fallen into a really good groove, and we've just been great partners in the business as well as in our personal lives. And one of the things that we focused on during the last 30 years was really bringing in talented people, and we're very willing to surround ourselves with men and women that we felt were either smarter than us or had expertise in a specific area, but also culturally were a good fit. So we've always been a very family oriented company, and our goal was always to put together a group of well-intentioned people who would support each other and collectively and collaboratively help grow a company. And, I think that's what we're most proud of. Among those folks, was Andy Raichle, who's, really high up on our list in terms of being sort of a co-collaborator and a co-creator of the company over the last several years.
Dennis, thank you very much for sharing about the origins of the company, and also how, as a newlywed, you started this. I'm sure entrepreneurs, business owners who are listening to this, who are in business with their spouses, are being encouraged by your words. And also, I like that you mentioned that you've been very intentional about the people that you've asked to join your team. And based off what you were saying, what I hear you say is that it wasn't only a matter of skills and ability, but I'm hearing something like you were looking for core value matches, people who match your core values, who would share your vision, and obviously also be very skilled in their area of expertise. And I like the fact also, because it shows humility on your part, which is so important in business, to be confident but be humble as well. And is that you look for people who perhaps excel in areas where you did not, or who were smarter than you. So thank you very much for sharing those things. That's very helpful to our audience. And I'm gonna move to ask Andy a question, given that he's one of those talents that was attracted to your firm. And Andy, will you please share with our audience what is your area of expertise, and how is it that you bring value to this company?
Sure. Well, I'm going to start with clarifying that I'm neither smarter nor more talented than Dennis or Jane, despite what they might think. So my area of expertise, it was sort of some kismet here, and you described the word intentional. You know, the things we do at Matrix they're intentional, right? We rely on intention, and combined with a lot of luck, as Dennis has often described. But the intention with Andy coming on board was that Dennis and Jane recognized that there was a move in society towards social responsibility and resiliency, and use of our resources in a way that was not only a social movement, but also a business movement, right? There was going to be work there. And I am a marine engineer. That's my origin story, and focused on things in the marine world. And then after Superstorm Sandy, that became a real focus in the marketplace, was being resilient to climate change. And so that grew beyond just my marine expertise into renewable energy and flood resiliency and water supply in Arizona. So we built a whole business around this, sort of thinking about the future and how we become more resilient to climate change.
So who would be generally your prospect clients? Who are the people that reach out to you for this type of services in which you specialize?
Sure. So the initiatives, you'd think they'd be purely driven by government, right? Federal, these are big sort of international or global issues, climate change. But that business has moved into the private sector as well. So our clients are utilities. They might be developers and banks who are financing big projects, that want to make sure, if they're financing a project for 100 years, they want to make sure it's going to be around and productive for 100 years. So it's a really wide mix. And what makes it a great business venture is that it spans the entire range of private and public clients that we often come into contact with.
Thank you, Andy, very much for sharing that. Will you please also share with our audience, in the simplest terms, people who may not be familiar with the terminology that you may be using, what is exactly that, or how it is exactly that regular people are impacted by this in a positive way?
Sure. Well, I think that starts in the simplest terms as to what are the consequences if we do nothing, right? And the consequences of do nothing are that climate change, I think the most obvious thing to people in the Northeast is flooding, right? We saw Superstorm Sandy and the impact that had. But there are more pervasive impacts. For instance, more frequent storms, and those are just your normal day like today, a miserable day with bigger rainstorms and more flooding, and it gets just harder to get around, as well as air quality impacts. And this really is about your kids and your kids, right? Is that today, yeah, if we, somebody like me in my lifetime, we're going to be okay. But this is thinking forward to 50, 100 years from now. Are we going to be able to sustain our society and lifestyles?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Andy, very much. And I have a question, and perhaps Dennis, you can answer this. Resiliency and sustainability seem to be the core of combating climate change. Can you please explain what is the connection?
I'm going to let Andy answer that because he really does lead our resiliency efforts, and
Sure.
he's got pretty dramatic examples of projects that we've worked on and how it fits into not only our corporation, but also in terms of the region and society.
Thank you.
Yeah, Paul. So maybe first I could talk to you about our business, and I think this ties into our business philosophy is that we think big in how we approach the services we offer, and a sort of overarching sort of goal for us is how do we respond, or how do we respond or anticipate the market, right? And the market says that the big challenges in the US, and just happens to be our marketplace is the US, but frankly, the big challenges for the world are these issues. So look at 20,000 feet. What are really challenges in the next 20 years? They're going to be infrastructure responding to climate change, right? That is a pervasive sort of problem for the world. And there's, at its simplest perspective is there's money to be made there, right? So why don't we gather the folks that can tackle and solve those problems? And that includes, we have offices out in Arizona, and they focus almost exclusively on water supply because they're in the desert Southwest and water is scarce, and that's a problem we are geared up to solve. We have folks in the Gulf, and their problem is principally coastal flooding and wetlands, and our folks there are focused on those issues. And in the Northeast, we really focus on infrastructure and the challenges associated with moving people around and keeping them safe in that environment.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate it.
Paul,
Yes.
Paul, I would add one thing that we also extend that internally, right? So most of our work is external to in terms of the region and around the country, but internally, we've undertaken an initiative, and I'm sure you've heard the term ESG, environmental social governance. And we've internally now are looking at how we operate as a company in order to minimize our carbon footprint and offset and be a little bit more resilient in terms of our operations. So whether it's how we approach a project or our operations. So we try to be holistically or have a holistic viewpoint of resiliency. So whether it's our jobs, our projects, but also our operations. So we have an internal team really looking at fundamentally how do we operate, and are there ways to offset our carbon footprint and be more resilient and more efficient.
I think that's huge because that speaks to integrity, and that speaks also, oftentimes people will compartmentalize aspects of their lives in the sense that they could provide a good service of being responsible for the environment, and they themselves not doing it. But the fact that the members of your team, your company, is living out the services that it's providing, I think that speaks volumes of the integrity of your company. So thank you for adding that, Dennis. I have another question here, and either one of you can take it. And I'd like to hear about Biden's infrastructure bill and how it will impact our state and the country.
Dennis, you want me to take that?
Sure, feel free.
Sure.
Jump in.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the Biden infrastructure bill is the biggest investment this country's made in infrastructure since the 50s, right? Since the Eisenhower administration. And as engineers and environmental scientists, we are on the front lines of seeing sort of behind the curtain of where those assets, what they are really, what kind of condition they're really in. And just frankly, it's not a pretty picture, right? As there's a lot to be done. We've neglected them for a long time. So how will it certainly in our industry, it's big news, right? Is that there's a lot of work to be done, and there's not, frankly, enough talent. And I say talent in a way that means just volume to get the work done. But from a national perspective, is that infrastructure is clearly a great investment, right? It pays for itself 10 times over, and there's studies to back that up. And I think that, put your politics aside on that. And I think that it was great to see that this was bipartisan in its construct, is that this is a real investment that has been made that will pay dividends both now and in the future. And just to dampen expectations, is that infrastructure takes a long time. So this money is going to be spent over the next decade. Mm-hmm. And then, we'll reap the benefits over the next 30, 50 years.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. I have a request for you. I'd like to either one of you highlight some of the groundbreaking projects Matrix has worked on in New Jersey, nationally, and abroad.
Sure. Here in the Northeast, one of the things we're really proud of is our participation on a number of offshore wind projects. Now, we're not necessarily involved offshore, but we tend to be involved in the engineering, permitting, and studies associated with bringing future offshore wind energy onto land and into sort of the distribution of electrical network. And so Andy's heavily involved in that. We also are involved in a number of resiliency projects along the coast of Manhattan and New Jersey, sort of protecting the island, the lower parts of the island of Manhattan from storm surges and sea level rise. And we've just have a varied history and a rich history of getting involved in the response to a number of natural and man-made disasters. And so we're really effective at assembling and deploying rapidly a number of resources to do damage assessments. And we've done that after Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Maria. We've done that after the BP oil spill. So we've got a rich history and a varied history of focusing our efforts on the issues that are affecting various parts of the country, and also some emerging issues. So whether it's resiliency, it's responding to natural and man-made disasters, it's being involved in new alternative energies, that's how we've tended to focus the company. So down in the Gulf, our team works on a whole variety of projects associated with ecological issues that are affecting the Gulf states. Out west, as Andy mentioned, we're heavily involved in water resources. Our team does world-class modeling of groundwater in order to establish whether future development can continue. So we tend to focus on a lot of emerging issues that are affecting the various parts of the country in which we operate. And Andy, I'm sure you want to jump in there and maybe add in a couple other examples.
Yeah, just locally, I'll give you a couple. They're not as pervasive projects that handle these huge issues, but interesting. For instance, we're working on a renewable energy plant in New Jersey that is going to take food waste and turn it into green fuel.
Wow.
With digesters, and really cool project, and setting up waterfront site to deliver the food waste by barge, and just a really great project. And then also, just as by way of another example, we working in a community in New York where they don't want to continue the use of natural gas, and are trying to phase that out to the extent that they can. And we're looking at feasibility of using geothermal energy in place of it. And so, those types of transitions are difficult and they take time, but, we seek those kind of challenges out and recognizing that it takes a transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and we're in the practical realm of we want to help make that happen without an abrupt stop, but transition over time.
Thank you very much for sharing about those projects. For our listeners, if they want to learn more about Matrix and its services, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Certainly, you can visit our website, which is matrixnewworld.com. And there's lots and lots of information regarding the various projects we work on, and as well as the services. And hopefully, maybe some folks are looking for jobs. We're hiring, just like other companies in our world. And as Andy mentioned before, one of the challenges as a business owner that we see over the next few years will be hiring, capable engineers, capable scientists, capable professionals to help, execute the large volume of work that's projected here in the Northeast and other parts of the country.
Thank you very much, guys. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, but I want to thank both of you for being part of this podcast episode. Dennis, Andy, thank you very much. Folks, we're going to make sure to list all their information in the description of the show and the podcast, being Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts as well, and YouTube and Facebook. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
I appreciate you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, go to NewJerseyBusinessPodcast.com. That's NewJerseyBusinessPodcast.com. We can't wait to hear from you and your business. You can also visit our website to learn about sponsorship opportunities and how to qualify for a complimentary gift. Thanks again for listening to the New Jersey Business Podcast.